Now hear the word of the Lord from John 21, 1 through 18. After this, Jesus revealed himself again to the disciples by the Sea of Tiberias, and he revealed himself in this way. Simon Peter, Thomas, called the twin, Nathanael of Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, and 2 others of his disciples were together. Simon Peter said to them, "I am going fishing." They said to him, "We will go with you." They went out and got into the boat, but that night they caught nothing. Just as day was breaking, Jesus stood on the shore, yet the disciples did not know that it was Jesus. Jesus said to them, "Children, do you have any fish?" They answered him, "No." He said to them, "Cast the net on the right side of the boat, and you will find some." So they cast it, and now they were not able to haul it in because of the quantity of fish. That disciple whom Jesus loved therefore said to Peter, "It is the Lord." When Simon Peter heard that it was the Lord, he put on his outer garment, for he was stripped for work, and threw himself into the sea. The other disciples came in the boat, dragging the net full of fish, for they were not far from the land, but about 100 yards off. When they got out on land, they saw a charcoal fire in place, with fish laid out on it and bread. Jesus said to them, "Bring some of the fish that you have just caught." So Simon Peter went aboard and hauled the net ashore, full of large fish, 153 of them. And though there were so many, the net was not torn. Jesus said to them, "Come and have breakfast." Now none of the disciples dare ask him, "Who are you?" They knew it was the Lord. Then Jesus came and took the bread and gave it to them, and so with the fish. This was now the 3rd time that Jesus was revealed to the disciples after he was raised from the dead. When they had finished breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" He said to him, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." He said to him, "Feed my lambs." He said to him a second time, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" He said to him, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." He said to him, "Tend my sheep." He said to him the 3rd time, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Peter was grieved because he had said to him the 3rd time, "Do you love me?" And he said to him, "Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you." Jesus said to him, "Feed my sheep. Truly, truly, I say to you, when you were young, you used to dress yourself and walk wherever you wanted. But when you are old, you will stretch out your hands, and another will dress you and carry you where you do not want to go." This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. And now let's hear this word from Pastor Jonah.
Good morning, Sojourn. This is Pastor Jonah. If you don't know me, or you're new to the church, I'm currently on sabbatical. I'm one of the pastors here at the church. And one of the things that's been really exciting for me during my time away, or looking forward to my time away, was being able to invite some of my favorite people in the world to come preach for us and be with you. And this morning, I'm really excited that you guys get to meet my friend John Starke. I met John through our partnership with Harbor Network. That's an organization we work with that helps to start churches, and then as they've started, to help them thrive. We love caring for pastors and their families, their wives, their children, people in their church, and that's how I met John in the very early days of our network starting. And since then, John has become a sweet, dear friend. He and his wife, Jenna, have cared for Allison and I so well. They've become kind, warm friends for us. And with John, there's so many things that I'm grateful for. He's a brilliant thinker. He's a wonderful author. He wrote a book on prayer that was absolutely transformative for me, called The Possibility of Prayer. It's a wonderful, wonderful book. But beyond all of those accolades and accomplishments, John has been a consistent, faithful encouragement in my life. When we talk about our churches and about our lives, his conversations are about knowing the Lord, being faithful, and helping people. John loves people, and he's a wonderful pastor in New York City, in Manhattan. And so he's been a good friend for a long time. We're privileged to be with him now. I'm grateful to share him with you. I love John, and if you would, give a round of applause and welcome him to the stage now. Hey, John!
Good morning. Oh, I miss Jonah. It's really good to see his face there. I about half the things he said are true, and but everything I'm about to say about Jonah is true. He's a really good pastor, and you all have a good. He's like one of the good ones. You know what you're supposed to say when you're preaching for someone. You're supposed to say a lot of good things about the pastor. But I just want you to know you have like one of the faithful good ones. And I'm not just blowing smoke up. Well, he's not here, so I don't have to. You know. I love Jonah. I'm going to preach out of John 21. We already read the sermon passage. And this is one of the more important passages for me, just for my own personal life. And here's what I want you to grasp from this passage, is that a life where Jesus has the significant upper hand in the formation of your identity and your sense of self. All right, so you with me so far? A life where Jesus has the significant upper hand in the formation of your identity and your sense of self demands what you could call stagnant seasons. And what I mean by stagnant seasons are moments or maybe long periods of time of vulnerability. And I don't mean vulnerability like I'm authentic and you can see who I am because I walk truthfully. No, I'm talking about where circumstances have made you vulnerable. So seasons of vulnerability and stillness. And the difficulty of these seasons of stagnancy is that you're just not very impressive during these seasons. There's nothing remarkable about you in these times. Not a lot is going on. And the impulse that we have is to sort of make something happen, to perform our way out of those seasons. And I just want to encourage you to reconsider that this morning and to maybe think about stagnant seasons where there are seasons of grace to receive. You have this scene in John 21, Jesus and Peter over a charcoal fire. Maybe you're familiar with this passage. And this is a stagnant season for Peter. Not a lot is very impressive about Peter right now. I don't know if you know his story. We'll talk more about it later. I almost knocked that off in the first service, so I'm going to make sure I don't do that this service. He's in an embarrassing season of failure. And here you have this intimate, profound, and deeply sensitive but painful moment with Jesus over a charcoal fire where Jesus brings up emotions and memories that are painful for Peter. And here's the important principle that I want you to kind of hold on to throughout this whole sermon is that Jesus never brings anything up that he doesn't intend to heal. And so here he is with Peter in this stagnant moment. And I want you to realize these stagnant moments are coming for you. That sounded threatening. Let me say it nicer. They may come. Maybe you've already received them. Maybe it's coming, or maybe you're in it right now. And it's seasons that are confusing and wearying and mundane or humiliating. And I know that our impulse is to try to make something happen and to perform our way out of it. But I want to encourage you to think about these seasons as having actually surprising amounts of potency, spiritual potency. So how do we receive these seasons? With vulnerability and paying attention to where God is present and grace is at work. So there's three movements to this setting, this story, right? The three movements are, it's the setting, what's happening, the fire, and the question. The setting, the fire, and the question. So the setting of this story, if you look at the very beginning parts of this passage, it begins with the phrase, after this. Now that's a loaded statement because a lot has just happened. The cross and the resurrection has just happened. That is momentous, of course, but it's also after the week of the whole feast. It's called the Feast of Unleavened Bread. It's this really heightened scene in Jerusalem. All of Israel is pouring into Jerusalem for a whole week. It's a religious and cultural and political heightened scene here. Everyone is there. Think New Year's Eve in New York City, but like all week long. All right? Everyone is present. And on top of that, this controversial figure, Jesus, at the beginning of the week, comes in on a donkey. Everyone's super excited to see him. They say, Hosanna, praise him. But by the end of the week, he's arrested. He's publicly, it escalates into a mob scene, and he's crucified. People are calling now, crucify him, who said Hosanna earlier in the week. And it's a public, emotional, tense scene. Then, you know the story, at the beginning of the week, Jesus rises from the dead and shows himself to all of his followers and all of his disciples. And it's surprising, it's amazing, it's a new world with new hope. After this, and the thing about this after this moment that now the disciples are in is that Jesus just showed himself to them, but no one else. Praise the Lord that Jesus is risen from the dead, but the world didn't change. It just kind of goes back to normal. Jerusalem empties out. Everyone goes home. There's no more feasting, no more drinking, no more singing, no more praying. And the world just kind of goes back to normal. And it's maybe in this little quiet moment now at the beginning of the next week after this, when the disciples begin to remember the previous week and their failures, specifically maybe Thursday night when Jesus was arrested and they ran away. They ghosted Jesus. When the heat landed, they flew, they escaped, they denied involvement, they washed their hands of the matter, and then suddenly Jesus comes back. Awkward, right? He's resurrected, and that's exciting. But in the back of their minds, I'm wondering whether they're beginning to wonder that it's wonderful that Jesus came back, but do we deserve to participate in what's going to happen going forward? When it mattered most, they did not last. They couldn't prove their devotion. So, after this, they went fishing. I mean, that's what they did before they followed Jesus, right? They were fishermen, right? Do what you're good at. Put your head down and get a win. Except they didn't get a win, right? They couldn't get any fish that night, which is a super big bummer, right? Maybe their fishing skills got rusty being with Jesus for 3 years, but they were going from failure now to failure. And it's in this moment of mundane, humiliating, embarrassing seasons of failure that Jesus comes. Can I just give you just an important principle to think about with this story? Emotionally heightened seasons they can be good. A lot can happen when we're all together and God is working. Maybe you remember earlier moments in your Christian life, maybe when you just became a Christian and there were seasons of great power and spiritual energy. And maybe for some of you, this happened in college. You became a Christian in college and you stayed up till 1 o'clock in the morning every night studying the Bible with people. And there's always a guy with a guitar, right? And you would just sing and just fall on your back worship moments where, the Bible seemed alive. All of your prayers were answered. Every moment felt like a burning bush. And then you got a job, right? And life went to kind of this normal, mundane pace. And maybe you got a few failures. Few humiliations along the way, and you're beginning to wonder whether God's still present. or if God's still working. You know, we lead a small church in Manhattan. And I don't care what people say. When they come to New York, they have a dream. They have an idea of what their life is going to be like, or at least what they hope their life is going to be like. They're going to have this amazing apartment by Central Park, of course, and they're going to have this beautiful studio or office that's white-walled, and it's amazing. It has these beautiful cityscape views, and they're going to go to all the great shows, all the great restaurants with all the attractive people, of course. And that's their dream. And maybe when they come to New York, there is just this exciting hope, and they're kind of there, and they can kind of put up with a lot of the weird awkwardness that you experience in New York. But after a while, you realize, I don't have an amazing office. I don't even have an office. I have a cubicle. And I don't have a window. The window's around the corner, and it's a wall, not a cityscape. It's just a brick wall of another building. And I don't go to all the restaurants because I can't afford all the restaurants. And I have the same crowded train ride home. And I've noticed in the last 6 months, I've gotten the same takeout every night. We love being in New York, but I'm just saying that is a little bit of what people begin to experience of, this isn't what I hoped for. And maybe we can begin to experience this spiritually in our own lives. You know what I'm talking about? Just this mundane, ordinary, and sometimes kind of lifeless existence. And we can respond in a few ways. Maybe it's cynicism, where you begin to think about your own spiritual life and how you can kind of just become indifferent to it, and you assume previous seasons were just hype. Maybe it was manipulation, or maybe you can even consider where the big C church is in this world, and you can get kind of cynical. Or maybe your impulse is nostalgia. You want to reach back from when times were good, and you want to make something happen. You want a new experience. And maybe your church that you're in right now just isn't doing it for you, so you're looking for a new church. A new spiritual experience, a new conference, a new adventure. Maybe you need a new job, or maybe even now you need a new spouse. And I want to maybe encourage you just to resist those impulses, both of them, nostalgia and cynicism. That don't move past these seasons of stagnancy. Don't move past them quickly. But consider that there might be some real meaningful moments of spiritual potency and power. But this is where God begins to do a deeper work. It's in this low moment of stagnancy where the disciples encountered Jesus, encountered moments of healing and restoration. And it just so happens that this miracle that Jesus does with them, right on the side, they didn't catch any fish, so he tells them to put their nets on the other side of the boat. They got all this fish, and just happened to be the place, the Sea of Tiberias, where earlier in John chapter 6, where he multiplied the bread and the fish. I don't know if that's an important detail, but John seems to put enough detail in this passage that I think he at least wants us to notice. And then there's also the detail of 153 fish. That is a weird detail. It's not 150, not a lot, but 153 fish. There's an interesting amount of commentaries on the Gospel of John who try to do a lot of really creative work and sort of what's the symbol behind 153? And you can do a lot with numbers if you want. But here, I don't think John is doing anything funny or creative. I think he's really just wanting you to see that you don't put this kind of detail in a myth. If someone is just telling you about a miracle, they don't say 153 fish. They say a lot of fish. It's not in the Sea of Tiberias, it's in the sea. There are these little details that's showing you that it's a real story. And what I think that's important is that moments like these of a healing and restorative and renewing encounter with Jesus happen to real people in real places. In other words, his disciples were in a real time after the Feast of Unleavened Bread. In a real place. They were fishing on the Sea of Tiberias with real, tangible details. 153 fish. Not 150, not a lot, 153 fish. Meaning, this is a real thing that happens to real people like you and me. Jesus comes in these slow moments. These mundane, wearying, embarrassing moments, and brings healing and restores. He meets us and is present in the seasons of disappointment and disillusionment. I just want to encourage you to receive these seasons, to receive them as grace. So first, the setting, it's after this moment. It's an after this moment. But then there's the fire. Jesus is moving not just from a miracle to a group of disciples. Now he's going straight to Peter, this work of one person. And he invites Peter to have breakfast with him over a charcoal fire. Now, maybe you don't recognize this detail if you just, after the first time you read this passage, or maybe even after the first several times you read this passage. But this is not the first charcoal fire in the story of Peter. In fact, just a few days previous, Peter was warming himself over a charcoal fire, and it was a very different scene. Jesus had just been arrested. All of his disciples ran away. Peter also ran away, but he also followed, hiding himself behind where they were taking Jesus. And finally, when they got to the place where they were taking to question Jesus, outside of that room, Peter was around a charcoal fire, warming himself. And he was asked 3 times, aren't you associated with Jesus? And 3 times, he denied even knowing him. You know the story probably, that the rooster crowed and it came home to him what he actually did. And it said that he wept bitterly. Just put yourself in Peter. Imagine that, why he wept bitterly. And then put yourself in Peter's position and he comes to another charcoal fire. Here's what we're invited to see, is that Jesus' death and resurrection really did cover and take away all of Peter's sins. He would never have to pay for that denial. Jesus did. But over this fire, there's going to be some needed work of healing and restoration and care. Jesus would need to address and heal this divide. And so this charcoal fire is a reminder of sin and failure and embarrassment. And Jesus is bringing that pain to the surface. He's going to deal with it. He's going to confront it. He's going to heal it. This charcoal fire is a reminder of all the pain and difficult emotions that maybe he's running away from. Let's go fishing. I don't want to deal with any of my problems right now. But here's Jesus. He's confronting it and he's getting ready to heal it. But this is also a meal. It's breakfast. And you don't have to read too much of the New Testament to realize how much Jesus uses meals to do the work of grace. Meals are an invitation into friendship. Meals are for intimates, not for enemies. They're for restoration, not for condemnation. And that's what Jesus is doing here. He's got a charcoal fire and he's got a meal with Peter. He's bringing restoration to this wounded heart. He doesn't ignore sin. He doesn't sweep it under the rug. He brings it to the surface. He allows the difficult emotions to come. You know those emotions where you're sitting still in a line and the difficult emotions come to the surface, so you reach for the phone and you freak out because the battery's at 2%, you know? Oh no, I can't escape. The difficult emotions that we often escape from, Jesus here is allowing to come to the surface. But remember, Jesus never brings up anything that he doesn't intend to heal. Because sin and shame do their best work when hidden, when covered, when escaped from. And Jesus wants to work a work of reconciliation and healing and renewal for Peter. So he uncovers it. He does it gently, restoratively, like a friend working reconciliation over breakfast. The charcoal fire reminds him of sin, but a meal reminds him of grace. It's all here. But it's important to know, and I think you're maybe hopefully grabbing this theme, is that this kind of work that Jesus does doesn't happen in a hurry. It doesn't happen in seasons where a lot's going on. It maybe won't be able to happen in seasons where a lot is going well for you. It may be in seasons where a lot of humiliation's happening, and a lot of pain and confusion. These seasons of slowness and obscurity are maybe more important than we think. So, the setting after this, the fire, and lastly, the question. 3 times, Peter asks, "Do you love me?" But the first time he asks it is sort of an awkward way. He says, "Peter, do you love me more than these?" And at first, maybe you're reading that and you begin to wonder, is he saying, does he love me more than the fish? Like, do you want to be a fisherman more? Do you want to follow me? But I don't think that gets to the deep question that Jesus is getting at. What Jesus is asking when he says, "Do you love me more than these?" He's asking them in the presence of these other disciples who are there, "Do you love me more than these?" And it's not a sort of insecure question of Jesus. All right, who loves me the most? But remember the story of John 13, where Jesus washes the feet of the disciples, and he says to them, I'm going to be arrested, taken away, and I'm going to be killed. And all of you are going to abandon me. And Peter, do you know what Peter says? Peter says, "Not me. I'm going to stick with you. They may all fall away, but I'd be willing to die for you, Jesus." And it's interesting in John 13 and also in Matthew 26, they both tell this story where Peter elevates himself above the other disciples. As the other disciples, he will be the one who never fails. He will be the one who will show exceptional loyalty. But now, after these abysmal denials, Jesus addresses this pride, this self-confidence. "Do you think you love me more than these still?" Can you feel that? That's like with a surgical knife. And here's what Peter is learning, this important lesson that his own passions and his zeal and his energy are not reliable sources for perseverance and lasting love. His own zeal and passion and energy are not reliable sources for perseverance and lasting love with Christ. Grit. Grit is huge right now. Do anyone want to read the book Grit? Grit is huge, and I'm sure it's here in New Albany. It's just big right now. You need to outlast and outpace the competition. You need to not quit, never bend, never slow down. Keep going. When you're hungry, skip the meal and keep going. When you're tired, skip the nap, skip the sleep, and keep going. Move past the competition. And we have spiritual definitions of this stuff, of endurance and perseverance, but we tend to inform these elements with how our culture thinks about grit. And listen, maybe you have grit. Yeah, I grew up in Kansas City, Missouri, so I'm a Midwesterner by my sensibilities. And grit has always been huge. This new grit is old news for Midwesterners. Is new all? Are you guys? Is this Midwest? Are we Midwest here? Okay, so you know what I'm talking about. Like this is just normal talk. You just get the job done. You work hard, and then you go to bed when the sun goes. I just stop complaining. Do your work, right? Be a person who people can rely on. And maybe that's how you think of yourself, a person who perseveres, person who gets the job done, who works hard, who doesn't stop, who's able to get your way through difficult times and keep going. Maybe even without complaining. The danger is to assume, though, the error that Peter did. He interpreted his zeal and his grit as spiritual strength. Listen, from ages like 18 to 35, Jenna and I we're now into our 40s. But between like 18 and 35, this was, we just felt like we could persevere through a lot. And there were seasons of real difficult, really challenging, and we didn't quit. When some people stopped, we didn't. Maybe we felt pretty good about ourselves. I think we had grit. Notice the past tense in that sentence. And then 37 hit. And look, 27 John is just different from 37 John. It's just a different guy. At 27, we had small kids. At 37, we had teenagers, and I just wasn't ready for that emotional season, whatever that brought. And there were seasons and moments of failure that were embarrassing and humiliating. I couldn't follow through on things. I experienced seasons of depression, seasonal and what felt like just random seasons of emotional weakness, and pretty meaningful physical limitations. And listen, here's what I'm trying to articulate is that my zeal and my passion and my grit that I interpreted as spiritual strength was probably oftentimes more temperamental and physiological than I imagined. And there came a time when I wasn't the same temperamentally and physiologically, and I had to learn that I could not depend on my own inner strength and my grit because it wasn't the same thing as spiritual strength and resilience. So listen, your perseverance and your grit and your ability to get things done and not stop and overcome may feel like spiritual strength, but it also may be just temperamental and physiological about you. And you may need to, there may be seasons where you have to lean into a deeper source of strength and resilience because, listen, your temperament won't serve you when the floor of your emotional life drops out. Your personality traits won't serve you when grief seems to really surprise you and suffering comes. I know many of us, maybe whatever Enneagram type you are, or I, J, N, whatever those are, you put them into your Twitter profile, your Facebook profile, and that's maybe how you think of your strength. But you will need deeper resources than that for perseverance and lasting love. Notice Peter doesn't say, when Jesus asks him, do you love me? Yes, Lord, I'm committed. 100%. You can count on me. I'm all in. Actually, when answering Jesus' question, do you love me? He doesn't even say, yes, Lord, I know that I love you. Did you notice that? He doesn't even refer to himself. When he says, do you love me? He says, Lord, you know. you know that I love you? And in other words, I can't appeal to my own convictions and my own zeal. They are not reliable sources. I can only appeal to you. Which, frankly, is hugely encouraging for me, and I hope it's encouraging for you, because there may be seasons where your inner life is absolutely confusing. Your behavior confuses you. Why did I do that? I mean, Paul, I think, experiences that, right? What I do, I don't want to do, and what I don't want to do, I do. That sounds like an extremely confused person. And here's Peter, probably really confused about his spiritual life, and isn't able to appeal to what he knows. He can only appeal to what Jesus knows. And Jesus knows everything, all the complexity, all the complicated things in Peter's life, all his sin, all his mixed motivations, and he still pursues him with love. And so listen, I just want to invite you, there might be seasons in mundane, ordinary, confusing, wearying seasons where you don't know what to appeal to in your own life. And the prayer, Lord, you know, might be a really good one to keep. In the New Testament, look, there are times where places call us to be passionate and zealous for Christ. But Jesus is teaching us that there are more reliable sources of strength than just your own inner grit. There may be seasons, and maybe this is it for you right now. Maybe you're in it. Maybe it feels like Jesus is sort of reading your mail, where we can't depend merely on our own energy and passion and zeal for perseverance and lasting love. You will need to have something deeper than that. You'll need to come to the presence of Christ, empty of the things you thought were your strengths. Peter was always the zealous one, right? If you read the New Testament, he's just the guy who had all the convictional energy. That wasn't sufficient in this time. He needed something more. He needed the presence of Christ. He needed the power of the Holy Spirit. But here, listen, 3 times he asks Peter, do you love me? And this is the hard part, right? 3 times over a charcoal fire, Peter denies even knowing Jesus. And then 3 times over a charcoal fire, Jesus asked Peter, do you love me? It's obvious, right? We get it now. We see that Jesus is making a point, and we can tell that Peter is wounded. Do you love me? He says, yes, you know that I love me. Do you love me? Yes, you know that I love you. Do you love me? Why draw it out 3 times, right? If you're one of the disciples, you're almost kind of thinking, just kind of sitting there watching this whole thing go down. You just, jeepers creepers, Jesus, let it go, right? Just say, I forgive you, and let's eat. If I was there, I'm kind of awkward in confrontations like that. I'd be like, I'm going to use the restroom while you guys continue this conversation. Why 3 times? In the Bible, 3 is imagery for completeness. Remember in Isaiah, do you know the story in Isaiah 6? Isaiah is before the presence of God in the throne room of God, and he doesn't say, wow, that's holy. What does he say? Holy, holy, holy. 3 times. Absolute holiness. And listen, 3 times Peter's asked, do you know him? I do not know him. I do not know the man. I do not know the man. He can't even say his name. It's absolute and complete denial. And you have to maybe just begin to put yourself in Peter's position, where maybe he's beginning to imagine that his sin and his denial absolutely defines him. And so Jesus draws him out 3 times, as if to say, my restoration will be as thorough as your denial. But my restoration is going to have the last say on you. Peter feels the embarrassment, the pain, and the sin. That's part of it. But by the time the breakfast dishes are done, he is feeling the joy of forgiveness. When he's eating fish, he's digesting mercy and kindness of Christ. Friendship and restoration had the last say on Peter. And it had to transform the way he experienced charcoal fires. Right? Every time now, instead of it being a moment that reminded him of sin and shame, it reminded him of friendship and the mercy and the kindness of Jesus. Do you know these things in your life where a certain kind of conversation or a certain person or a certain object or a certain place just floods you with feelings of shame and grief and guilt? And so you absolutely avoid those objects like the plague. What's interesting with these kind of encounters in mundane seasons with Jesus is that he completely transforms these objects, whatever they are, whatever those charcoal fire objects are for you, from being reminders of shame and sin to reminders of kindness and mercy. Because listen, friends, I know the feeling that sin and shame can just be the absolute definition of who you are. But grace and mercy is going to have the last say on you. We have the saying in our church community that if you have Jesus, what belongs to Jesus belongs to you. What is true of Jesus is true of you. Your future is as bright as the glorified Christ in heaven. And listen, sin and shame are powerful weapons. They are. Sometimes it just doesn't feel like we can kind of get over these elements, and I get it. And even if you're feeling still the weight of those moments on your life, where it just feels like I can't overcome it, I want you to hear the promise that grace and mercy and kindness and friendship and healing is going to have the last word on your life. That's good news, amen?